This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Ziak and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. Jay, speaking of said union, I like using that word said. Because it's underappreciated in that context.
It is.
Speaking of said union.
Maybe because we don't live in the 1800s, but
Boulder Dash. We have a returning guest. She's been here before multiple times, has joined us for roundtables, has joined us for album selections. Last year, it was the Alabama 3. Before that, it was Fastballs, All the Pain Money Can Buy. Also joined us for our Nirvana episode on Nevermind, our Muse in the 90s roundtable. A couple of thankful episodes. Guilty Pleasures. Welcome back, Marissa Buxbaum. How you doing, Marissa?
I'm great. That I feel like that selection is either very representative of my tastes or skewed in some bizarre way.
I feel like it's representative. Yeah, I know. I feel like we just did that Alabama 3 album not too long ago.
I know. If you asked me when did we do that, I would have said 3 months ago.
It feels like yesterday. This year flew by.
That was November of 2021. So almost a year. See, the thing is about the patrons that maybe people don't know is they all basically joined in the same month, but I got to weirdly spread them out because we can't do 25 episodes in a single month to satisfy everybody's picks. So sometimes it's going to be like November, other times it's going to be August, which is however the die roll.
When I was like, really? The time has come already? But
yeah.
I'm glad for it because I started revisiting this record as early as this past spring, thinking about, what it is I wanted to say about it and how it felt to me something like 18 or 19 years down the line, however long it's been since I first discovered it. So good timing.
Share what that album is with everybody.
This is Visual Audio Sensory Theater by Vast, which came out in 1998, and I personally discovered it, and I want to say 2004 or 2005.
Okay. Jay, you're familiar with Vast, right?
Boom.
He's got the album.
This is a pre-release EP.
Oh.
That has 4 songs on it, the first 4 songs of the record. So yeah, I picked this up before the record came out. They did this as a promo, and I picked it up in a cutout bin, I think. It was like interesting album cover, and I picked and said, "Why not? I'll spend $2," and took it home and got into this EP. And I think within a couple weeks, the full record was out. But I don't think I followed the band after this. This is really the only album I know.
Yeah, it was this album, and then I didn't check anything out after this record, but I had listened to it around the same time you did when it came out, because we were just like buying $1 records or $2 CDs out of bins all the time and just being like, I don't know what this is, but the cover's cool.
Once again, then I am here to represent the hardcore fan who went well beyond that first album and got sucked into the rest of them. This actually might be the one that in terms of my active listening habits, I revisit the least. I think Nude is probably number 1, followed by Music for People. So trying to bring that context to the discussion.
Well, we got some comments over at our Patreon page.
We sure did.
We got a lot. People were very, very talkative about this record. And we'll talk about their votes at the end of the show when we share our ratings. But here's what some people said. Bill Davidson said, there's a deliberate mood and pacing on this album that I think requires all 12 tracks. Anything shorter wouldn't have the impact. Industrial isn't my bag, but this is a good representation of the genre. Jon Crosby seems less intense than Al Jorgensen and Trent Reznor. Richard Waterman said, great pick, Marissa. You stuck to your word. Look forward to some Jon Crosby stories from when you saw them live. Some have described Vast as industrial, but that's pretty loose term in my opinion. To me, they're just a rock or alternative rock band. You have some good examples of electronica and sampling, especially the Eastern tinge of some of the songs. And of course, we have some Benedictine monks. Looking forward to what Tim and Jay think about the chanting. I really like the dramatic, melancholic, atmospheric, and dark vibe. Jon Crosby's voice always reminds me of Jim Morrison, which I like. Lyrics are questionable at some points, but that's a minor quibble for me. Marissa will explain. All much better than I do. Take it away, Marissa.
Oh my gosh.
We'll get there.
I do think it's very funny that it's described as industrial because at least to my ear, it's anything but. And when I think industrial, I think of like, Throbbing Gristle or Skinny Puppy. This is so not in the realm of that to me. When I hear it, I hear like 90s alt rock Hans Zimmer or goth U2, Moby Goes to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It has these moments of propulsive, like electronic aggression. But the whole conceit of industrial music is that it's mechanical in a kind of transgressive way. And everything that Vast does, even when they're using technology, I don't want to say that it's archaic, but they're using it in kind of a stripped down fashion. And then paradoxically, they blow it out into this like grand sweeping orchestral thing, but the component parts are very organic.
We'll save some of that for when we get to what we liked and what we didn't like.
Pump your brakes.
Yeah, pump the brakes there. I know you're excited. Because we got to talk about Gavin's comment. On the flip side, he said, I've given this a decent single because I actually want the intensity of the music of industrial elements. It's well done, and I get the impression it's exactly what they set out to achieve. But for me, Nine Inch Nails style elevator music is the answer to a question nobody asked.
Yeah, I love a good burn, even if I don't agree with it, and that one's great. So
That's
I appreciate
a good burn. Carl F. said, I voted Worthy Album, but I think it may be two better EPs. The first 4 songs or so have tremendous energy. The back half is more mellow and ambient. Touched is one of my favorite songs. At first, I thought this was an album to avoid a custom rating for me, like Pirated Download or Beverage Coaster. This is Ian McIver. He says, after initial play, though, I thought it was a worthwhile listen. However, it failed the most crucial test, holding up to repeated listens. If I heard a couple of singles back in the 90s, I may have even bought the album, but it would have been quickly forgotten and become a dust collector. The youth of Jon Crosby really shows with him and his band using different musical styles with mixed results. And I sampled later works which show he will find his quote-unquote voice. He goes into a lot more, but I'll say, he says, I'm sure Marissa, with her infectious passion for music, will convince me otherwise to bump up the needle, but for me, it's a better EP. Jeff Gentis said, after a couple listens, I have determined this is not my speed, but I wonder if Marissa and the boys can discuss this can fairly be called light industrial or industrial light, but that sounds like insulting or
adult
zoning.
Industrial alternative.
And Willie Dillon said, I think it's pretty neat.
Thanks, Willie.
Which sounds like a kid who just got served up some mozzarella sticks at
He should come on for the next ska episode whenever you do that.
There you go. Just a little background, and maybe you can chip in a little bit on this. The Jon Crosby's name's been thrown around. He's from Petaluma, California. He actually began making music at the age of 13, and he was in Guitar Player magazine at that age as a promising guitarist of the future. He did home recordings with guitars and drum machines, and he left high school to study and begin his own band, to do home study, which he called his band Vast. And he sent demo tapes to radio stations and record labels, and he got in contact with Elektra Records.
Yeah, I think originally when he at least was doing the demo for visual audio sensory theater, his goal was just to get a cheap publishing deal. And he had no idea that there was going to be any label interest.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I think he just
So-
wanted to finance like get a band together and do a small regional tour.
So the debut came out in April 1998. It was produced by Jon Crosby as well as Frederick Mayer. And it ended up getting some recognition in terms of there were some singles, but also there's some songs used on the TV show Angel. And it was used into the film Step into the Liquid, which is a surfing documentary.
Oh, that's right. And I think one of the songs might have been used on a trailer for that Leonardo DiCaprio movie, The Beach or something. Maybe I'm misremembering.
Oh, I think you're right. Yeah. So this was followed up in 2000 by Music for the People. That was also on Electric. Then he left Electric, released Nude in 2004 on 456 Entertainment /SB. Then released Turquoise and Crimson in 2006. April came out in 2007. Me and You came out in 2009. Making Evening and Night in 2014. And then Black Magic in 2018. There's also been a number of other like EP releases, digital releases that were later turned into albums, live versions. There's like a live at CBGB's, live in Chicago.
Yeah, I was at that show. I was 17.
You were at the CBGB show.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about this experience.
It was fantastic because when I first got into Vast, I was wringing my hands over the fact that there were no tour dates. I could not locate any kind of live presence to them that I could follow in the area. I think it was either 2004 or 2005 that my dad flew me down to Austin to see them, because at the time those were the only dates I think he was living there. But eventually he made his way to New York City to play CBGB, and I think the success of that show hinged almost entirely on MySpace, social media marketing, which he was at that point cultivating very actively. And that's how I found out about it, was on MySpace. And that might have been actually the last show that I saw at that venue before it closed. But I was stunned by just the power of the audience response. I mean, everyone was going absolutely nuts. For years, I had felt like sort of the only Vast fan in the tri-state, and everybody who was there was going bananas. You can hear me screaming on that record. As much as electronic samples play a role in his production and songwriting, I think the songs translate beautifully live, are sound best as part of that live rock band format. And I'm really glad that got properly recorded and released, because that is and the other Live in New York City album that he did that I think is from 2009 or so. I revisit those the most out of any of his recordings. It's always the live recordings.
Interesting. Also interesting is that the album Nude, which I mentioned came out on 456 Entertainment, was a record label owned by Carson Daly.
Ooh.
And Jon Crosby called the experience, well, he didn't have a good time working with Carson Daly. He said it was a nightmare. There were so many problems dealing with them on every level. I feel like we made a big mistake not believing in ourselves enough and doing it on our own. So he actually would have just self-released it because it was such a nightmare working for Carson Daly's label.
Well, that's what he wound up doing ultimately, is pursuing the purely independent route, and was doing so in a way that was sort of pre-Radiohead in Rainbow's Radiohead.
Gotcha. Yeah, because a lot of these albums were like digital EPs only that you could buy MP3s, and then he compiled them into albums later. But that's interesting. And he's also released solo work. and has a band called Jon Crosby and the Resonator Band.
Much less familiar with that. I'm not sure to what extent he is active as a musician. I'm sure that he's still creating stuff and perhaps releasing it independently, but as far as his live presence, touring and playing shows, I don't think I've heard of anything in at least 7 or 8 years. I mean, I know he's raising a daughter, and perhaps he's just wants to not be running around on the road, which I totally understand. Plenty of rock bands, they have kids, families settle down, they go that route. But he's been very quiet, such that I honestly don't know what he's done after 2010, 2011 or so.
So interesting. Obviously, this is late 90s. This didn't come out on vinyl originally. If you go to the Vast website, which is realvastshop.com, they have when it was repressed in, I think when was it pressed to vinyl?
2 years ago or something, actually.
Well, 2012 was the first one, unless there was another one. Is a double LP. He was selling double LPs for $25. They're sold out now, and if you try to buy them on Discogs now, it's like $250.
Oh shit. Oh, so maybe I'm thinking of the Record Store Day release. That's the one that's a couple years old.
Yeah, that was the Music for the People.
Got it. Okay.
Was the Record Store Day release. So let's get into this record, shall we? Jay, tell me one thing you liked about visual, audio, sensory, theater by Vast.
I'm a sucker for drama, so this album brings it in so many different ways. You've got the big choruses with the driving drum machines and the heavy guitars, but I think what's to me most interesting is everything else that's going on. It's almost like that's secondary to me. The use of organs and strings, I think, is really cool. They build a lot of tension. I love when he layers in acoustics too, whether it be for kind of a quieter verse or just kind of, in there with the chunky guitars. And all that comes together to just create so much tension throughout the record, where you've got these builds, you have these mood shifts that happen. I don't know, I guess what we're calling them, monks, whatever the chanting kind of
Gregorian chanting, yeah.
Overdubs are.
Benedictine monks, yes.
I love that. I mean, I don't know that everybody can do that, but there's something about the way it's introduced on this record that just it just takes you to a different place. It just brings this mystery, mystique kind of vibe, and it ends up sounding I don't know, to me, it brings this folky tinge to it. I mean, obviously it's gothic and dark, but it also feels like, I don't know, in a weird way, more human than, when they're full on distorted guitars and drum machines. There's this interesting dynamic of hearing those voices layered in that kind of pulls you out of the synthetic and into more of, I think, a more natural kind of feel. Jesus Christ, are you the Son of God? I want to know. You ask that I believe. No one day goes by that I don't compromise. Your love for the cold love of the world. It's killing me through my own evil pride. No one day goes by that I don't know that I'm dying. I think the last thing I'll mention is just, I forgot, he's a pretty amazing singer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously he does some of the Trent Reznor stuff, the kind of hush vocal with all the compression on it, but I didn't remember him like really belting it out and almost crooning at times. Like he brings this kind of romantic edge to some of the verses that I don't think you hear in some of the contemporary bands that we might talk about, whether it be Nine Inch Nails or even Stabbing Westward was another band I thought about. I hear more like Depeche Mode style vocals from time to time throughout this record, which just brings this whole other sensibility to it. And melodically, it's really interesting. He really lays into it on Dirty Hole, Somewhere Else to Be, I'm Dying. I just had totally forgotten about how much the vocal is a huge part of the record. He's not afraid to like cut everything back and you just hear him singing, which is, I think kind of refreshing. And again, it's just one of those like drama builders that happens through the record where he just lays into a part, pushing a lot of air and a lot of emotion. And you just hear his voice, which again, I think cuts through some of that synthetic production and just makes it human again. So to me, his voice and the voice of the samples keep it grounded in this space. It's different than I would consider a lot of industrial. It feels more real in a weird way, even though it's high production.
Yeah, that's why the label feels like such a kind of a bait and switch, guilt by association type of thing.
Yeah.
You extrapolate on the basis of who you assume the audience for this is going to be.
Right. So that's some of the stuff I liked. What about you, Tim?
Well, this is like catnip for me in a lot of ways because I really like the industrial tinged aspect of this album, the looped drums, the very industrial sounding guitars, like on the first track here.
Where do I put the shame? It feels like a broken toy I can't play with anymore. Where do I put the hate to a pixelated screen I can't watch anymore? All I know is that I'm here, drifting somewhere in the past, somewhere in eternity, and I never want to leave.
That's right in my wheelhouse because I don't really get with super heavy industrial. I'm definitely more in the commercial space with regards to like Nine Inch Nails and to some respects like Ministry and that kind of stuff. But when you add in, the Benedictine monks of Abbey St. Maur, in an 18-piece orchestra, like it's not a sampled orchestra. He got an orchestra to play.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
He actually traveled around the world to record the samples. So like they're not just like pulled off of some record or something. Like he went with a recorder and recorded Benedictine monks. There is a sample that's used. The song Touched uses a sample of a song called, I'm going to mispronounce this, Pilanzine P, sung by the Bulgarian State Television Female Vocal Choir.
Quite a mouthful.
Yes.
Wow.
So I love the creativeness in bringing in really unusual sounds that you wouldn't find in sort of a mainstream 1998 alternative rock record. Way more now than I would have then. I don't think I would have graduated to that level of appreciation in 1998, but hearing it now, when I've listened to a much wider array of music, like I sort of giggle a little bit at how ambitious it is for a teenager to be. I don't know how old he was at this point, if he was like still in his teens or if maybe he was a 20 at this point, based on when he got signed. But to just have this level of ambition for a record, it's either going to be really, really cool or just be abysmal.
Right.
Because when I described it to my wife, I'm like, so it's like industrial, but imagine having Benedictine monks sing on it or chant on it and Gregorian chants. Like, it sounds really pretentious,
Yeah.
but it comes off in a way that, like, why wasn't this guy doing movie soundtracks for like the last 20 years for like like a Hans Zimmer?
Yeah,
Because
that's exactly the origin of that comment. Yeah.
yeah, like this sounds like totally in that ballpark with regards to these big soundscapes and the ambient aspect of this record, which is, again, not something you heard in 1998 from a commercial major label record, unless it was a Moby or, the one thing that it reminded me of, which I wasn't huge into this band, but there were elements that reminded me of like Typo Negative, just in terms of its like sort of gothic, like heavy vibe that it was putting out on certain songs. Obviously it doesn't have the same vocal as the gentleman from Typo Negative had.
Right.
But it's so ambitious, and I did find that I liked listening to it over and over again. I would just like sort of put it on, and when I wasn't feeling well over the last couple days, I was just like lying in bed just listening to this on repeat, because somehow the like massive nature of this when you crank it just sort of envelops you in this strange world that he's created on this record. And it really is an album, like through and through. This record does not, I think, need to be parsed by single to me. Like, there are a lot of really cool songs, but I can't imagine anything like catching the ear of a teenager in 1998, unless they're a very ambitious listener as a teenager. So yeah, there was a ton that I liked about this record. I know you covered some of that earlier, Marissa, but what are some particular songs and whatnot that work best for you?
Okay. Well, again, I agree with you completely. This is a capital A album. It's almost difficult for me to listen to it in bits and pieces. And like Jay said, it's so transportive. It creates a world. It's got this primordial yearning, this primal element, but at the same time, it's platonic. I view Jon Crosby's approach to songwriting as like distillation. It's very simple, but I don't mean simple like facile. I mean like driving down to the essential core of what transfixes us in a melody or a chord progression. It's like mythological, what you love about a fable or a fairy tale. There is like a pursuit of timelessness, I think, musically and lyrically, like a kind of classicism to it. And this is also why I think that, contrary to what Rich suggests, that for the most part, the lyrical material has actually aged really well. My first exposure to Vast was through Pretty When You Cry. And I understand the instinct perhaps in 2022 to wince at a song like that. But to me, what it's doing is pure like Phantom of the Opera, you know what I mean? Or Beauty and the Beast, Hannibal Lecter and Clarice Starling. The appeal is so visceral and so self-evident to me that it requires like zero interrogation. I'm sure that it is a song that's grounded in the narrative of an actual relationship, but the execution of it is not going for realism. It's just this pure fantasy. And so, it becomes almost allegorical. This is not like mimetic storytelling. This is not modernist. This is Baroque. It's romantic. It's like a Caravaggio or a Turner painting, and it's got the same like emotional qualities, frankly, that are present in the Afghan Wigs and the Twilight Singers or even Nine Inch Nails that are very attractive to me. It's just that the approach is a little different. The structure is a little different. It's got this like shameless indulgence to it. This really pure, unaffected, disarming pursuit of just like catharsis. There's zero irony. And I think that, if there is no irony, there is none of that like self-consciousness, that involvement at some level in like a meta conversation about genre constructs, the industry that you're a part of, the audience that you're trying to speak to. At least in the 90s, that puts you at kind of a disadvantage, because I think like one of the hallmarks of 90s rock is that it's operating at that level of meta commentary, and kind of in an anxious way, that it conflates a concern with authenticity, whereas I think that like Jon Crosby's authenticity is one of doing whatever the hell you want, regardless of how overblown and ridiculous it is, and not giving a shit what anybody else thinks. Just, flooring the gas pedal in the direction of Edgar Allan Poe or something. And that is the vibe that I get from this record. And that was what, as like a moody 15, 16-year-old that I was, it was like catnip to me. Same way it was catnip to you.
Yeah, what's funny is that you were mentioned about other art forms. Like, to me, this has like in a weird way, it's almost like Terrence Malick, and it's so big, and it's got so many ideas, but it's also so like singular in its vision that I just have to kind of appreciate it.
You have to. It's an album you need to surrender to,
right?
And like I think that it's somehow both contrived and like the opposite of contrived. You know what I mean? Like it's got this ambition, but he's so sincere. It's so earnest. And it really does drive down to me emotionally at that, like it feels like a fable or a fairy tale, and not like so much of what constitutes 90s rock music, which is the Radiohead or the Nirvana, and there's a wryness to it, an incision, and here it's a completely different, it's following a totally different path.
Sleep without her dreams, strolled as it seems. It's my destiny. How many men have been in your sacred
Jay, you mentioned Dirty Hole. That to me is like one of the most interesting songs on this record, because it's so, first of all, it starts with an organ, which
love it.
which I love. It's such a good organ sound.
Yeah, I love that sound.
And then it turns into like this working on a chain gang beat with these rotating vocals that are like moving in and out. It almost becomes like a round of vocals that are coming in and coming out, and he's got multiple harmonies and melodies happening at the same time, and it all works in a weirdly bizarre way. But like, I can't imagine anyone else pulling that off. Like, it's such a weird song, but yet it's so compelling.
Yeah, it gets to a like very like bluesy, soulfully kind of place.
Yeah.
That you wouldn't expect. And I think that's where a good example of what I was mentioning earlier, where by putting these elements together, they suddenly like arrive at this very human sound.
I think that was that's an Alan Lomax recording, I think, from Sounds of the South. So that's an actual chain gang. Yeah. And that I guess that is okay. That is the one that is the one song where I feel that at least the lyrical content has not aged particularly well. Like, oh no, the vagina is a grave. It's a little heavy-handed, but I do think that like the actual the content of it, the melodies and the samples themselves are totally unassailable. It's a great song.
Yeah.
Jay, what doesn't work for you on the record?
I think when the songs or the parts of songs that are more guitar riff driven and in particular drum machine driven start to become, like I mentioned earlier a little bit, it feels a little derivative. Like it doesn't feel as original and different. I start thinking of Nine Inch Nails. I start thinking of Stabbing Westward. So even a song like Here is a good example of that. Three Doors is another. You also just sonically, it starts to put a stamp of the 90s to me on it. It's fleeting. It's not consistent through the whole record, but when those moments do pop, they kind of pull me out of the space that it's created, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, now I'm back in the 90s. Versus the world that the rest of the record creates. That's the biggest thing for me.
I agree with you on. I noticed that I focused in on the guitar in Here because it was just like like, so I was like, could you do a little bit something alternate? Like the only thing that was changing was the first time he did it, the was, and then it was, so it was like just a scrape difference in terms of the pick hitting scraping the strings. And I would have liked just a little bit more ingenuity because that goes on for like 2 minutes of the song.
Yeah.
But that's a minor nitpick. I do agree with you. Yes, there is like it's just the tone of the guitar and then the drum loop sound just has that 90s God Lives Underwater / whatever other industrial pop kind of, not heavy, but like in that space. But it's not enough for me to like want to get rid of the song. Same with Three Doors. Like I still think the songs are cool. I just, those tones didn't exactly age as well as maybe some other stuff.
I'd be so curious to know if Music for People is grandfathered in on a technicality because of when it was recorded, because I'd be so curious to
it does.
hear your guys' response to Music for People, because I think you would enjoy it. I think you would find it less sort of pigeonholed in that 90s sound.
Is it vastly different?
No, that's the thing about Vast is that it's so much its own thing that even when it does vary, it's painting with the same palette. You know what I mean? It's almost like, are you guys familiar with Uncle at all?
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, if every Uncle record is like Uncle doing a different genre, like War Stories is them doing rock and roll, Never Never Land is trip hop, Where Does the Night Fall is psychedelia. Sort of every Vast album has kind of its own tone, but is distinctly recognizable as being, at least to my ear, Jon Crosby.
I actually am interested in checking out that record because I like this record enough that it would make me want to go forward and check some things out. So, and it is grandfathered in. It's a 2000 record. There's a 90s record that gets it into the consideration. So if somebody wants to suggest Music for People, either via a website suggestion or picking it for their album next year, they could go ahead and do that. Just saying is there anything on this record that either doesn't work, or a particular song that you've never liked, or a particular song that maybe has stuff that hasn't aged well, besides the lyrics that you've already mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I really do think that as a whole, I love it so much. I'm a completely biased source here. I can't weigh in objectively because it was such an important album to me as a teenager. I love it just totally and uncompromisingly. I think that even the songs on it that I don't personally listen to all that much, because I'm just like, I'm allergic to ballads, for instance, just generally as a rule. If it's below a certain BPM, I start to like nod off, zone out. But Flames is just such a beautiful song It's a gorgeous composition, and he scored it. I don't know if scored is necessarily the right term, but he arranged the orchestral part, which I think is it might just be a cello. I can't remember, but he's got this incredible intrinsic flair for composition. He really is just an incredible classic songwriter. So I can appreciate a song like Flames, even if I don't revisit it anywhere near as often as I do Touched or Temptation, which are two of my favorite songs on the record. Pretty When You Cry, which still, to this day, even at 33 as opposed to 16, it's magnificent. That last verse before the chorus, it gets me every time when he's, you get that turn. If you knew how much I loved you, you would run away. Like, that still nails me. I love that.
Is it weird? Not that we have to talk about this. There are aspects of this album that reminded me of like the Gutter Twins.
Yes.
Like you mentioned Temptation, like I could hear Mark Lanigan singing on this record.
Oh yeah.
Very easily. It's
sort of the same autumnal palette in a way, this dark, moody, it's spooky in a very alluring way.
Right.
Sepulchral. And yeah, there's a lot of the same DNA in there for sure, at the very least emotionally.
All right. Well, we need to get to our overall ratings on this record. And I know that our patrons had some thoughts. So I'm interested to see how I need to refresh, because I didn't refresh that. I know that might have been a vote in the last minute there before I did my last refresh. No, there was not. So, Jay, where do you land? Where the album, better EP or decent single?
I'm at a worthy album. I was surprised I enjoyed it as much as I thought. I haven't listened to this in a long time. Really probably since it came out. I expected to honestly for that to not hold up from a production standpoint, but also just stylistically. I didn't think I would connect with it. But I was wrong. I enjoyed it quite a bit. And I actually found myself drawn to some of the slower material that I think when I originally listened to the record years ago, didn't really pick up on as much or enjoy as much. But I just love I love the arrangements. I love the cello and the strings and the piano and all the layering. And I just thought they were really well done. And then again, those samples really do a good job of, in those slower songs, pulling you through, creating a little twist and some juxtaposition and just these odd, unexpected moments that, at least for me, between that and his vocal performance, even though the tempos drop, I was still, compelled. I was still there for the ride. So can't say that about, all records. When the tempo drops, it's kind of hard with our short attention spans sometimes to stay engaged with those songs, but I enjoyed those as well. So it's a worthy album for me.
I concur. Worthy album. It's hard for me to separate this record into like what an EP would be. I understand what I think it was, who was it who said, Carl said about, yeah, I mean, there's two halves sort of this record. And it would actually
kind of a downshift on the back end. I get it. Yeah.
And that's okay. I mean, I think that those are still compelling and interesting tracks that are a part of the whole. So to me, it's a worthy record, and I don't have anything that I would kick off necessarily. I think my issues are just a little bit of production stuff here and there. Marissa.
Certainly a worthy album from me on every possible front.
Well, our patrons agreed. 88% went with worthy album.
Is that my best score of any album?
It might be.
Because man, I have submitted some clunkers to the union, I guess, or at least they've been gauged as such by our listener base, by the community. But I'm very pleasantly surprised. I expected this to be a lot more polarizing than it was, and 88% or 89%, whatever it is, that's pretty resounding approval wise.
That's what we call a landslide. And 6% went with better EP, and 6% went with
Nine Inch Nails elevator music.
Yeah, Nine Inch Nails elevator music.
I'm never gonna get over that. I love that.
So hey, different. What's that saying? Different strokes for different folks.
Or Nine Inch Nails fax machine music, because Somewhere Else to Be actually samples a very slowed down fax machine, believe it or not.
There we go.
Huh.
I did not know that, but now I'm going to start sampling fax machines.
How do you know that, Marissa?
Because Jon Crosby released in 2005 the equivalent of a director's commentary, only it's an album commentary. And I bought it and listened to it, and he was like, "Oh yeah, that's that weird beeping sound that you hear in Somewhere Else to Be. That's a fax machine." Then I slowed down. There's also like no snare in that song. Like every song that's there's something about it that's unexpected in some way, even if it's a classic rock or pop backbone.
Right.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for bringing this record. I think it's been talked about, but I don't know if it was ever in a poll before. Jay, was it ever in a poll? A Vast record? I don't think so. But
I don't think so.
But we've known about this record, and it's kind of been on my mind. Like, when is somebody going to bring that up? Because that was a unique record for the time period. And then I thought, well, maybe Jay and I were the only ones that ever heard it.
It did. Sorry, it wasn't a poll. Richard Waterman nominated it.
Yeah, I did this for Rich. Rich, I hope you enjoy.
The Union United. I like to see it. Well, let's tell some folks about where they also can go to suggest albums. That's at digmeoutpodcast.com. You go to our suggest an album page. You can drop an album idea in there, and it'll end up in one of our monthly elimination tournaments where we vote on 9 albums a week. 9 albums a week. The top 2 move on to the final round at the end of the month, where 6 albums get voted on for a review. And you can go to, like I said, digmeoutpodcast.com. And if you want to vote on those records, you got to join us at Patreon. dmounion.com. digmeoutunion.com is where you go. You can vote on albums, other stuff. You get free 80s episodes every other month, which I think we got to be doing one soon. I think this is an 80s month episode. I don't think I've even put a poll up yet.
I was wondering about that. I was like, should we be doing an 80s episode right about now?
Yes, I will put up a poll for that. And it's also Patreon, where you can read the box newsletter, which you can sign up for at our website. It's a newsletter that goes out every week. 2 new reviews of 80s and 90s relevant music, movies, television shows, documentaries, books, plays, Broadway musicals, all kinds of stuff. And it's a release calendar of all the new stuff coming out each week that is relevant to our podcast. And then lastly, speaking of the podcast, if you've enjoyed it, please consider going to Apple Podcasts and leaving us some positive feedback. So Marissa, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
On this, I'm saying end of summer, but it's not really the end of summer for everybody else. It's just the end of summer in my house because everybody's going back to school this week.
Right.
But it's like summer's over. It's done. But,
well, I'm just so happy to have finally knocked it out of the park with one of my submissions.
Definitely.
Good note to end the summer on.
Good note to end the summer on. So for Jay, I'm Tim. We're out. We'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.